Hi, everybody. I am really excited to be here today for the Chalice in the Well interview, filling your sacred chalice from the eternal well within. I'm Brianna Wunderlin, and we are here today with Micheal Dunning. And Micheal um, has a really beautiful history with the yew tree, and we're going to be diving into the Yew Mysteries today. The yew is a sacred tree, especially in the UK, but all around the world. And during the late 1980s, Micheal became extremely ill as a result of an encounter in the far north of Scotland with an otherworldly being. Several years later, and close to death, Micheal was led to an ancient female yew tree in the south of Scotland. He spent 9 years under this yew, where he was healed and given the template for a mystery school based on the direct teachings of the yew tree. Micheal refers to the teachings of the yew as the Yew Mysteries. He is also a biodynamic craniosacral practitioner and teacher with over 25 years experience. He is a visual artist and keen jazz musician. He teaches the Yew Mysteries in Wales and Scotland, UK, as well as in the US, where he actually lives. And he has written about his experiences with the yew in a book called Soul Companions, and in many other publications, including Sacred Hoop, the Journal of Contemporary Shamanism, and Indie Shamanism. Micheal is currently writing a memoir about his experiences with the yew. And we'll probably hear some of those today. We're going to be diving into the yew as a gateway to the well of eternal wisdoms and regeneration. Welcome, Micheal. So beautiful to be here with you.
Thanks, Brianna. It's a real pleasure to be with you. Really excited to explore this with you today.
Awesome. Cool. So this piece in your bio that says you sat under the yew tree, or you were with the yew tree for 9 years. Is that right? 9 years?
Yes, just a little bit more than that, in fact. A little more than 9 years.
And that you lived like next to the tree, or you like actually like camped there the whole time? I'm just curious about the actual detail.
Yeah, that's a good question. I ended up being, I was very ill, so I ended up being helped to be looked after in a sense, in a way, and I ended up going out to a cottage on an old estate in East Lothian, Scotland. It's about maybe 40 minutes from Edinburgh, mm-hmm. on the coast, and the yew was on the grounds of the estate. Mm. So, and ironically, a tree surgeon took me up to see it, and I just knew as soon as I was there that I had kind of come home. Mm. So I would be summoned. There's a really strange. There are a lot of very strange things with the yew, the way it works with physiology, the way it works with what we understand as the body. Yeah. And because I was so ill, I was so kind of opened up in a way. I wasn't really in the everyday world a lot of the time. And I called it the summons of the yew. So it was as though the yew would speak into my blood particularly. And I'd feel this kind of drawing out so that I knew I had to go. And that was an experience that built up over the years. So I called it the yew summons, where I would kind of not be able to ignore it. And I would have to go regardless of the time of day. And it was only about maybe a 10-minute walk from the cottage, maybe even less. And in those days, I was really ill. I could barely walk. So it was quite an endeavor to get there, especially in the middle of the night when, you're stumbling around and what am I doing going to this tree in the middle of the night? So so it was very much a summons. So we could talk about.
Yeah, I love how you're talking about that and how it, the blood, like that it got into you physiologically. I'm curious.
Yes. I mean, I think a lot of my process of healing was almost like a reclamation of incarnation. Mm-hmm. I felt almost excarnated through what the events that had happened before then and the illness that I was going through, which was never really ever identified as such by medical. By the medical establishment, because it was initiated by a strange encounter in the north of Scotland. So it defied all kind of logic and all rational explanation. So I felt this reclamation of my own incarnate self in a new way, and the yew seemed to initiate a process of a new kind of embodiment, a new way of being embodied, and that was really the healing that took place. And a lot of it was through the blood. A lot of it was through the blood as a kind of interface. And it's interesting because the yew is often called the red tree, and some yews actually do bleed. There's a phenomenon called a phenomenon of bleeding yews, where there's some yews actually emit a substance that looks extraordinarily like blood. So there's all these parallels that I won't even begin to get into between the blood and the yew. For example, when it rains, often the bark becomes incredibly red, like blood, like flowing blood almost. So there's some strong connections there with the blood and the yew that I've been working with now for a long, long time, and sort of drawing them out and understanding them more as the years have gone by. So
yeah, wow, that's really amazing. And this kind of like teaching you in a different way to be embodied, kind of talking about some of the how we can connect, physiologically, our own physiologically with the yew, which I think is so beautiful. And on a consciousness level was obviously healing you too. So I'm curious about that, like how you felt that consciousness and how it opened you.
Yeah, so that's a great question, and I in the Yew Mysteries teachings, I refer to the mind of the yew, the mind of the yew as this kind of singular consciousness that would sort of speak into me in a way that was instantaneous. It was almost as though you would get the understanding of what the yew was trying to communicate to you in one single gesture. It wasn't like a series of, it wasn't like intuition, like a sort of a concatenation or a connection of or a sequence of thoughts. It was almost like a singularity of thinking that was like I call it the gesture of the mind of the yew, like planting a seed into your mind that would grow into something resembling human thought. So I'd have to almost be planted there first, and then I would go through a process of absorbing it, integrating it, and trying to understand in my limited capacity as a human what that was about. Sometimes it was instantaneous, sometimes it took longer to understand. And it was often a process where the mind of the yew seemed to function in the space or the chamber of the yew. And I can explain what I mean by that in a minute, because the yew is actually a chamber that I spent time in. It's actually very unlike a tree in all of its morphology. You actually have to enter into it inside. It's like a living chamber of its own self. And I can explain that in a minute. But inside of the chamber of the yew, there would be a kind of a mist-like light would appear. And I call it the alkaloid mist, because the yew gives off, the bark of the yew, the roots of the yew, just about everything of the yew gives off an alkaloid toxin, a hallucinogenic toxin.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I didn't realize that at the time, of course, but at the time I noticed a kind of what I called the silvery mist, that I later understood as like an alkaloid cloud or an alkaloid mist. So nobody else has actually ever talked about these things except for me. There's nobody in the world has talked about alkaloid mist or alkaloid clouds. So, I'm the first to have kind of named some of those kind of secretions from the yew in a way that affects consciousness, and to talk about it in a coherent way. So you would see that kind of silvery mist, or sense that silvery mist, and often then the mind of the yew would speak through it, as though that mist was coming from somewhere else, that in time I understood was really an aspect of the other world speaking into into the space, and the you as being a kind of, the mind of the you is actually living in the other world essentially and speaking to me through that place.
Yeah.
And from that place. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so fascinating, because we're jumping like back and forth between like embodiment and consciousness, and how you like how something from the other world that is incarnate in a form, in a sense, in the yew tree, and then us as a form in our bodies, and we have our own consciousness, right? And like it's informing you, and then that's helping you be more embodied. So curious about those kind of truths that led you into that process, or helped you with that becoming incarnation again. Incarnate.
Yeah, you're bringing some really great great questions to get into this, and I think it really helps to understand that if I describe the morphology of the yew a little bit, and when I first encountered the yew, it was at nighttime, and as I mentioned to you earlier, it was through a tree surgeon, and we had a bar was involved, a pub was involved, and which is, I laugh about it now, and it's just silly, but that's just what happens in Scotland. It's not good, it's not bad, it just happens. So we were at the tree about 3 o'clock in the morning or something, and he took me to like a pyramid shape, what looked like a bush, a gigantic pyramidic bush with a sort of black opening near the bottom, and just pushed me in to it.
Yeah.
So I said, off you go. And I entered a tunnel, and that tunnel was really low. And if I stood up, I would be jabbed by branches on top of my head. If I turned to the side, I would be jabbed by branches. And I realized I was in a tunnel that was a little bit like the birth canal or something like that, in a way, and which is really another aspect of the yew, which goes very deep. And this kind of canal or tunnel rose slightly, was very constricted, and probably about 40 feet long, roughly, and rose up into an absolutely perfectly sealed, inverted cauldron-like chamber, where I could see, because there was a little bit of moonlight, I could see the center of the chamber, the midline of the chamber, was the trunk of the yew. And out of that trunk, about 12 feet, the branches grow out and begin to descend back down to the earth. And it's a process called branch layering that the yew does. It touches the earth, and then it begins to grow. It roots itself and then grows out towards the periphery. And it creates basically a peripheral forest around itself of itself. So basically it creates kind of clones of itself around. So you get a 400-foot circumference of a sort of interiority, an inner chamber, and a skin around it. So it's almost like the yew goes through a process of kind of inversion, where it sort of turns the outside world into an inside world, so that other things can happen, other things can enter, other influences can permeate that space. So as soon as I was inside that space, I realized that I was in a space that wasn't exactly like the space that I had just been a few minutes earlier.
Yeah. And
even in that first encounter, I knew that, and that was experience. It just got stronger and stronger. So it was almost as though the form of the yew is very important. The form that takes place on this earth, that form was or the gesture of that form to create an inside that could be different from the world around it. So I think that is really what your kind of question is sort of pointing at, because inside of that chamber, things could happen that didn't happen in the outside world. They didn't happen in the way that the natural world or natural law, the way we understand that. So uncanny things happen in that space, and that's really where all of my healing happened, was within that sealed, enclosed chamber, where the laws were different. And I would say now, I understand it now, that really that you're coming into relationship with the laws of the other world in that space. And the yew is a kind of custodian of those forces on the earth. Yeah. In a very, very pure and potent way. Does that help to answer to shape some of that.
Yeah, yeah, it does. Well, my first reaction when you started to describe the process of, like, crawling through that space is I love doing that. I don't know that I've done it exactly with a yew tree before, but I just love going into spaces like that in nature. And I started to get teary, like it's so beautiful to be inside that space, this like mystery, like you're saying, you're going through this canal to the other, like entering into the other world in a sense. Um, and
Absolutely, yeah. And I
yeah.
mean, there was a one time, there were probably many more yews like that, particularly in the British Isles, but throughout probably Europe and elsewhere too. Um, and just to finish that little piece off, I refer to that yew, and there's very few that actually have that form.
Mm,
And I refer to those yews as fulfilled yews,
mm,
as yews that have been allowed to fulfill themselves on earth, to fulfill their shape, which is really an otherworldly shape on the earth. Very few yews have been allowed to have fulfilled that shape, and there's a big story behind why that is, um, that we can choose to get into or not, but there are very few left now that have that. So that yew was unique and is unique. And ironically, there's another one nearby in the same area that has a similar gesture. And I have not seen anywhere in my travels and my teachings, and I've met a lot of yews now through the Yew Mysteries work, I have yet to find and see other yews anywhere near the level of fulfillment of those yews that were right near each other in a tiny little pocket of Scotland in East Lothian. Yeah. And what's interesting, and I'll say this thing, I know I'm adding a lot of layers here, but what's interesting, and this is just a little clue to the story really, is that both of those yews are not attached to churches. And that's the big significant factor,
yeah,
as to why they were allowed to be fulfilled.
yeah, yeah. Okay, that's really fascinating. Yeah, we should like get into that too. And what did I want to say? Oh yeah, since we're kind of like approaching, the sacred portal of the yew in a way, and through talking about it, I'm just wanting to ask your maybe guidance for people who are like, wow, and then they think I'll approach a yew, because sometimes when we approach a being and then we're conscious that it's a being rather than just a tree, then there is a way to approach that being that is in good relationship, with it. And so I'm just wanting you to make some points about that so we don't skip over it and people maybe approach in a way that, in good relationship.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of different ways of talking about that. And in many ways, because it's so potent in terms of its alkaloid emission and its kind of mind, its mind is so potent.
Yeah.
In a way, how would I say this in a way that doesn't get too much down a rabbit hole here, but we can think of other psychoactive plants that for a human being, they must be ingested, they must be taken into the body. In a way, the yew, if you ingest it, will kill you. Mm-hmm. So the yew is highly toxic in all of its parts except for the aril, which is the yew berry. Berry is not actually the correct terminology, but it's a red aril on the female expressed yew that grows in the autumn. But the rest of it's toxic. So what I often say to people is that there has to be a way where you can allow yourself to be ingested by the yew. Okay. So rather than you ingesting the plant, you allow the plant to ingest yourself. And that involves a high degree of yielding of a human consciousness, because we tend to, it's not a criticism here in saying this, but we're all the same. We tend to, because of the way our senses are organized, we tend to kind of grasp for an experience, or we tend to kind of move towards something. We tend to have an aim or an intention. And in many ways with the yew, the the approach is in a way to step out of that type of sensory directedness and start to kind of loosen at the edges. And that involves quite a bit of yielding of the mind. And a lot of the teaching we do in the Yew Mysteries is to help people to begin to kind of loosen the sheaths, loosen the mantles, so that they can begin to be moved by the consciousness of the yew rather than by the fulcrum of their own consciousness. I mean, we're all experts at organizing how we perceive around us and locking ourselves down into the kind of perception that we it's like involuntarily that we sort of have, you know, and it takes quite a bit to move out of that.
Yeah.
And to be able to be flexible enough in consciousness to be able to be moved by something that isn't yourself.
Yeah.
Truly. So there's a way of kind of just moving into the you and beginning to allow yourself to loosen and allowing your consciousness to begin to yield and allowing yourself to be breathed by something. And I think only then does the mind of the you really begin to speak. It's not really interested in the kind of organization of a human being through the sensory nervous system. It doesn't really connect with that sort of information. You know, it actually almost communicates in a way with, I don't want to get too drawn out, too disconnected here from people listening, but it's almost as though we have to kind of develop an embryonic consciousness. And to sort of have an embryonic consciousness that you can actually still be conscious inside of.
Yeah.
So, and then you begin to kind of be moved and shaped and breathed by the you. And often it's people report, and over the years now of doing this work with groups, people often report a profound stillness or an absolute a sense of just no content, a deep profound restfulness, or just a sort of a being moved, a being lulled. And they'll often fall into a kind of sleep that isn't really a sleep. And they might be kind of given something then, and they'll come out of that and, you know, talk later in the workshop about that. So I hope I'm making sense. There's a lot there. And perhaps if we get time at the end, we can do a little bit of the mantle practice, which helps to kind of loosen.
I was feeling like that could be good now, actually, since we're kind of going into that place, you know, invoking that consciousness in a sense.
Yeah, I mean, if you'd like to do that now, and that would be fine with me. And is there anything else you think we could say to kind of create a shape around that, or?
I wish I knew your style better. If I knew your style better, I could.
I know. You know, let me say one thing. I think a little bit it might, because I want to maybe just justify a little bit of what the terminology I just used there a little bit. When I was going through my time when I was really ill, you know, you try to get help. You try to ask people, you know, what you try to get some support. And I started to hearing about at that time. I mean, I had been an art student, and I wasn't really somebody who was. I wasn't somebody so interested in the New Age movement. I hadn't really paid much attention to that. I mean, you know, I had been interested in the arts, and that was my primary life at that time. So I spoke to an anthropologist actually who mentioned when I first heard the word shamanism, and I remember looking, like researching and starting to read about shamanism and shamanic books and things like that. And I got quite frustrated because I couldn't really find my answers in a lot. I found a lot there, don't get me wrong, but I found amazing things, but I didn't really find something to really reflect what my experience was. I mean, shamanic dismemberment, yes, I mean, that was definitely part of it to some extent, but there was something else going on there in the healing that wasn't being addressed by any of those books. And it was only when I started studying embryology in the context of the craniosacral work that I saw my own sort of shape of my own healing reflected back at me. And I realized that the early events of who we are, before we actually take on a physical body, we actually are more of a peripheral being. Our body is really more peripheral. It's more like a fluid wholeness that's kind of just contained by mantles, sheaths, by skins, membranes, and yet we're sentient in that way. And I realized that what the Yew was calling me in a way, by when it was drawing my consciousness out inside of that chamber, it was kind of pulling me in more into a gesture of form that was more assuming the shape of the interiority of the chamber, almost as though I was being called back to remember a sort of more embryonic state, something that was there before the body appeared, and something that was also the key to helping me to build and that new body, to kind of heal and build a new body. It was almost like I had to go touch origin to be able to claim what was the new me, sort of thing. Sounds strange, but the new embodiment.
I know what you mean.
Yes, I'm sure you do. And the Yew was a sort of teacher of that. And to paraphrase other people who said this in the osteopathic world and the cranial world, in a way, the same forces that make us, in a way, are the forces that heal us. And the Yew really exemplifies that. So for me, there was a sort of quality about going back into the womb, if you like, that chamber of the Yew was really a womb space. And really the shape really talks about that, going through, almost like going in reverse. So often I would say to people, you have to kind of go in reverse. You kind of have to go back through the birth canal into the womb, and then go through an experience of shedding the consciousness that you have and shedding what you think you know, and then see if you can assume a new form, and if that form can come to you. So maybe that helps a little bit to see that the embryonic nature of the Yew is really the embryonic kind of igniting of embryonic consciousness is really an important part of that healing. Yeah.
It's beautiful. I'm in love. I mean, to be dramatic about my state, I'm like, I'm a total like womb baby. Like, I love being in womb spaces all the time. And I can just, from your talking, what my experience is, just envisioning myself in that space, surrounded by that Yew that has rerouted itself all around me and created this chamber that is both porous, but also enclosed, and resting, curling up and just like resting in that space.
Yeah. And it really just, and not to kind of add too many other complicated layers, but also in a way you're moving back into a womb that's also kind of a placenta. Because the shape of it and the feel of it when you're in there has a very placental quality about it. So it's almost as though that you kind of come back into relationship with this kind of nurturing placental organ, as well as this kind of womb connection. When you go a little deeper with it, there's actually something more placental about the Yew that is where things really begin to shift. And in the Yew Mysteries, we talk a lot about the placental twin and how do we come into relationship with our placental twin in this life. And there's, I've been able to look back and see that there's all of these connections in Welsh mythology that actually are teachings that we've kind of missed some of what they really meant. So maybe at some other time we could talk about some of that, but there's little hints there that the placenta is kind of present in Irish and Welsh mythology in ways that we don't really realize that it's there, but it actually is, like the way some other cultures have teachings about the placenta. In the British Isles, there were also teachings about the placenta, but they got lost.
Yeah.
So the Yew reminds us of these teachings in a way.
And what is a placental twin? Just so we know.
Well, the placental twin was, you can think of each one of us has a placental twin, because the placenta is your genetic twin. Yeah. So every one of us comes into the world with a being that is actually genetically identical to us. And yet that twin doesn't go along with the vector of development that is happening for us.
Yeah.
It actually holds itself back from mineralizing, from beginning to develop the kind of structures that we need in order to be born into the earth, the physicalized earth world. And it miraculously is in the same space as us. It's genetically identical to us, and yet it resists going through the same development as us. So we have this interesting twin there that's holding back from all of these processes that we're going through. And as we're born, it dies. And then we have this sense of what actually happens to that consciousness of that placenta. So in the teaching of the Yew Mysteries, we talk about how, as each of us having a kind of placental twin that moves with us through life. And when you bring that consciousness into the chamber of a yew, it really, really begins to accelerate, and you begin to understand, wow, perhaps thousands of years ago, a human being had a different understanding of embodiment. And that the yew, which was sacred to the British Isles, to large portions of the British Isles and to Europe and elsewhere, of course, too, 2,000 years ago, Britain was covered in yew tribes. It was absolutely filled with yew tribes. So clearly there was something going on there, that there was this great teacher being that was teaching people all these thousands of years ago about who they were. And I would go so far as to say that the yew was, in some ways, was a factor in the development of our consciousness, and actually an accelerator of our consciousness. But so there's a lot. I'm saying a lot there. I'm saying an awful lot. But there's a very big placental connection there with the yew.
Yeah, I that nurturance that is there. Like you're getting nourished by your placental, the part of you that's your placenta. And
yes.
Yeah,
definitely. And that doesn't stop. And yet, maybe the yew asks us in a way, what is your, the yew sort of says to us, tells us we're not finished. Hints to us, when our consciousness yields to it, it says to us, where are you going? And where are you going to go next? And I think right now, at these particular times, for me, there's a real urgency about where are we choosing to go? And for me, I felt that the yew was kind of saying, not that it's the only path up the mountain, or not that I'm having some messianic message for the world or something, but in a very quiet way, the yew just quietly says, I am here as a teacher of a custodian of knowledge that may have been lost about where the human being might potentially go if it's able to listen and able to come into relationship with that more expanded placental twin, and be able to sort of continue to move in a direction of development, and not to think that we're stuck where we are and this is where we're ending. There's been embryological studies, for example, that show that much of a human being is actually more primitive than a lot of animals. So there's lots in us that we see ourselves as being so advanced, and yet so much of our physiology is actually in some ways more primitive than the specializations that we see in the animal kingdom. So we retain a kind of embryonic nature through life as a human being that resists specializing into the animal kingdoms. So we have these kinds of embryonic organs in us that are not finished. They're not done with their development yet. They're holding back, just as that placenta holds back in the womb. So there's something about a human being that's not done. It's not finished. It doesn't make the human being superior, but it just means that there's something to us that's a little different. And the yew calls to that. It calls to that which is unfinished in us. And it says to us, would you like to continue? And would you like to take this further? And in order to do that, we need to ditch that consciousness, you know?
Yeah.
And so, and again, it's a small work. It's, you know, maybe at one time when there were more yews, there would have been something more amazing to imagine. The landscape covered in these fulfilled yews and how consciousness might have been, but that's no longer the case. We don't have so many left, so which is why we need to protect them. So
yeah, wow, cool. And does it feel like we could enter into some of that mantle together, like maybe like inwardly?
we probably should, right? Because I think I've probably talked enough about all the other stuff, but
you've opened many gateways that I hope to travel down later as well.
yes, I'm sure that there'll be a few streams to move down here. So yeah, what I'd maybe like to do is just to take us through just a short piece with some of this mantle work that we do in the Yew Mysteries, and we'll just see where we go.
Okay.
So I think probably people can close their eyes if they like. I will probably keep my eyes closed as I go through this, and I'm just going to suggest that we just find a comfortable position, just find a way that there's as little stress as possible on the organism, and find a point of balance for ourselves. And just allow a little moment for some settling. So often there's a sense of going into the presence of the yew, where, as I mentioned, there's a quality of being sort of embraced at the level of the blood. The most ancient word for the yew is that we know of is Aya, which means eternity, or by extension to be touched by eternity. So there's an aspect of touch, a tactile aspect with the yew. So you can feel for a moment, we'll just call it our skin, and just get a sense of to begin with, the surface of, perhaps we'll start with our face, just for simplicity's sake. It's the sense of the surface of your face. It's as though we would be perhaps turning our face into the sun on a very warm day, and just that feeling where of warmth that sort of gives us a sense of the oneness. Face as a oneness, as a one single sensation. It's one surface, there's one face. And then just allowing that to become a little bit more broad through your throat. The upper rib cage area, just finding that surface, feeling yourself as a surface. Not really interested in going inside or diving inside, staying really right on this surface, as though you were balanced in your perception, poised on the surface. And a sense perhaps of the surface all the way to the belly. Just finding that perhaps the dorsal, the whole back side of that. So that sense of the surface that's at your back. You can call it skin, but you start to realize that there's a loosening that begins to take place. You begin to feel the sides of our surface. Slowly more of a sense of a oneness. It doesn't have to be perfect. We're not looking for perfection. Just what's available in the moment in terms of a sense of a kind of surface that might be beginning to quality of breathing about it. You might be able to feel an ebbing, a sense of being moved. We're not quite as, we're not embodied, let's say, exactly the same way anymore. It's begun to make a little shift. And as we do this, we begin to notice perhaps the underside of that surface, just a quality, like a mantle, a layer of blood. Maybe be able to feel a certain quality of warmth to that blood. So there's a sense perhaps of warmth, and a feeling that we might have this mantle, this surface that is not quite identical to the physical body, and yet it's breathing. I would often find that the consciousness of the you would speak into that layer of blood, begin to call, begin to almost change the shape, begin to reshape that. And simply just allow my mind to be as transparent and as breathable as possible to that. I'm not trying to understand it. I'm not trying to intellectualize it. I'm not trying to track it. I'm not trying to surround it. Simply trying to move with it. I'm seeking to, as we do this, seeking to invest more of our attention into this more peripheral mantle-like body. It's beginning to become more perceptible, more prevalent. The surface becomes more like a new kind of sensory surface, a new surface for sensing. So we kind of let go. This takes some time to let more of a new sense get birthed, a new kind of peripheral sensory organ that is actually becoming more and more open to the natural world around us, to the environment around us, sensing what's coming to it. This was always very key for when I was within the chamber of the yew, the sense of this expansion through the blood, the sense of beginning to assume the shape. In my case, it was the shape of the inner chamber of the yew, as this kind of shape of embodiment. But in this case, we're not inside of the yew, and we can just allow ourselves to get a sense of what's coming towards this mantle-like blood surface. Feeling how the natural world is coming towards it, touching it, pass right through the walls of our rooms, our houses. So we have a sensory surface that's open to the world outside. It's open to the elements, to the elemental beings, perhaps. It's to experience nature in a much different way. And it's through the surface that I would begin to feel changes taking place. I begin to feel the shape of a healing, shape of a health that I hadn't felt for a long, long time. And that health, that shape of that health would begin to reshape me, begin to change my sense of who I was as an embodied being. So for now we can be in this shape, and just in however it's manifesting for you at this moment. Again, it doesn't need to be perfect, just whatever is there for us at this moment. And then one of the great mystery teachings of the Yew Mysteries was really a teaching about how all of this relates to the horizon. So for everybody right now is to see if you can get a sense of your local horizon. See if you can, with this surface, see if you can actually be touched by that horizon and touch that horizon. Not conceptualizing it, not intellectualizing it, not trying to rush out to find it. See if you can actually have what we might call a felt sense, to use a well-known phrase in somatic work, a felt sense of the horizon. So we can have this sense of this mantle. This mantle is a new sensory organ that is beginning to touch the natural world. And by extension, it begins to be open to the wider horizon, the local horizon. And we find that who we are as an embodied being is very much more expansive, that we're actually in relationship to this horizon. So we want to see if we can feel the way this horizon begins to change us, begins to soften our perception. Perhaps we begin to feel a sense of warmth, perhaps even a resting, where we can actually rest in this horizon. We don't have to work so hard. We don't have to be extending with our minds all the time. We can actually rest. And we can rest in the mystery of the horizon. Nobody knows what the horizon really is. You can't measure it. And yet it divides the night into the day, allows us to have time. But we can't measure it. It's mysterious. When we begin to touch that horizon, we can begin to perhaps be influenced by a world, a realm. It's not filled with the kind of laws and spatial laws or information that this one is filled with. There's something about this world that's actually different and it's coming to us. We can feel saturated by the breathing of this world actually coming into this blood mantle and forming the shape of our embodiment. So just spending a moment here, just feeling saturated by this otherness, realizing that we actually come into relationship at the horizon with the other world, the Welsh called the Anun. And this is a teaching about the other world that is unique. It's not going to be found anywhere else. This is something that comes out of the Yew work. Horizon is powerful and known about in some other teachings, but this connection with the other world is unique to the Yew Mysteries. We usually think of the other world as subterranean or another far off place, but actually we can come into relationship through this breathing of the horizon. And it can inform us and it can reshape us. And the key thing here is that we're involved in a kind of a circulation. There's a metabolism to this. So as we're being saturated by these forces from the horizon, we've moved out through our blood mantle to touch and be touched by it. Now for a moment, perhaps, and only if it's available to us, we don't force anything, is to see if we can find our heart in this moment. While in this mantle place, while connected to this horizon, can we find the shape of our heart? It may not be the shape that we're accustomed to having a sense of it as. We feel something very different, more expanded, more fluid, more awake. The heart measures, the heart's always ready to measure what's coming to it. So let's see if we can allow some of this saturation, this force, and this movement of wholeness from the horizon. See if we can allow this to come into the space of your heart. It can be touched by the other world, touched by the forces of the other world in a way that's bypassing thought, bypassing the nervous system. And in this moment, perhaps we can feel a sense of a fulfillment, the fulfillment of a breathing, something that has been fulfilled, something that we can, in this moment, complete a breathing with the other world. We'll spend a few moments just allowing that to settle us. Feeling the shape of ourselves in a slightly different way, feeling a different kind of embodiment. Yet it's incarnate. It's not an energy, it's not an aura, it's not drifting off somewhere. We're actually incarnate in a way through this blood mantle that is different. We realize that we're more than we seem from the point of view of the body. And in the Yew Mysteries work, we take this kind of core principle and we work with it, and we deepen it. And we let the Yew, as the great teacher, how to find this new embodiment. One of the last few teachers on the earth, perhaps, can be able to help us with this. And we let the mind of the Yew guide us forward in this work. So just spend a few more moments just to perhaps coming back a little bit more into the space of your own particular environment, But trying to do this without decompressing this shape. You can't hold the shape constantly. Of course, it has to breathe itself and it has to metabolize itself. It's not able to just be something there all the time. It's going to breathe and move and reshape itself. But for now, see if we can come back into your space without decompressing that and opening your eyes last. So you can open your eyes from that newly embodied place and see your own environment differently. See it through new eyes, through a differently embodied place, perhaps. Well, welcome back.
Thank you. I do feel new.
Yeah, I do too.
Oh, good. I'm still like trying, in a way, my consciousness is holding this shape. So coming back into words is like,
Yeah, perhaps we don't need too many words to come to a conclusion here. And I guess we're probably over time anyway.
It's okay. All right. Well, everybody, please check out more of Micheal Dunning's beautiful Yew Mystery work. There'll be a link below about it, and hold your mantle. Your porous, beautiful, new you consciousness. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Brianna.